Alright everyone, hello. This is going to be an updated map guide for Sand River. I've learned some things, I've gotten some feedback from you guys. I think this one should be a lot shorter and a lot more helpful. I decided to, for the future, it makes the most sense to combine the map guides for various tanks. Instead of doing a video for light tanks, for medium tanks, for heavy tanks, for TDs, I'm just going to do one video for mediums and lights because those styles tend to blend in with each other, at least in my experience, unless you're playing a pure scout like an even 90, but that's irrelevant. Um, then you'll see heavies and TDs together. I find that their styles also mesh pretty well, or maybe that's just me and I play my TDs like heavies, but beside the point. Anyway, now that the 1 minute intro's out of the way, let's talk about Sand River for TDs and for heavies. We'll start at spawn 1 here. As far as why this whole area is highlighted, because the whole ridge ends up being viable at different points in the game. For me, I'll start over in this bush here, on this corner of the ridge, and it'll give you nice shots on this area. What you'll see a lot of cases, you'll see light tanks cut down here and go up this, or they'll even cut in a little deeper. If you have a light tank that's going like here to counter spot, they can go here to here, and they'll spot whatever's crossing in this area here. You'll generally have a shot on it. It may only be one shot, but it's a nice thing to possibly get rid of a lot of a light tank's HP early in the game because they can be really detrimental on this map later on. So as far as this ridge, I'll show you what it looks like in game really quick. I've I've learned some things as far as your guys' feedback, and this should be a lot more helpful. Whenever I'm going to snipe mid, I'll sit next to this rock, sort of like right here. It just gives me nice shots. There's that cross we were talking about right here. I've had a fair few shots there for a nice amount of damage. But later in the game, for example, like I was saying, you'll end up playing over here or something in order to counter a hill push. It's just another way to illustrate how useful this whole ridge can potentially be. I would not sit here the entire game, though. This is definitely something I would either start the game at or kind of sit around later in the battle. But if we go back to strat sketch, the other position I'll play is this rock over here from spawn 1. I'll play this in a chunkier heavy, like a mouse type 5. Even something fast necessarily, like a 277, if there's a lot of artillery, I'll still play here. I have a little thing here for conditional. We'll talk about that when we get there. This spot right here, I specifically sit on the southern side of this rock because from here, it'll give you shots generally on stuff here. It'll give you shots on anybody up here, anyone down in this. You'll get a lot of heavy tanks that are statistically not doing very well push through the valley still. I find that this push is just too... How do I phrase it? Like, too riddled with tank destroyers. I find it's very annoying the amount of TDs that sit up like back here, over here. On top of that, you have artillery that'll just dump on you down south. But anyway, again, we'll look at that right now, just to give some context. This ridge right here, it's generally going to be a little bit more artillery safe than anywhere else. You're not totally safe. You will get hit here. Every time you fire a shot, if you get spotted, you really need to tuck in under this ridge as close as possible. If you don't, you are... Even if you do, you're liable to get hit. You'll still lose 200-300 HP to a CGC or something. But when I talk about playing here, if there's, for example, enemies pushing down at, like, K3, right there is K3. So you have shots on there from here. You could just shoot right through up to that ridge, and it'll give you a nice chunk of potential damage because it tends to be like a not a roadblock, but a spot people tend to stop at. So it'll either be like J2, then K3, then K5, so on and so forth. Like there's increments of the push we talked about in the first map guide. But if you sit over here, for example, this almost gives you a little bit of a hull down as well. And you could farm any of the guys who go down mid, anyone crossing that ridge if they come in early. You could also pump some blind shots over into that sniper hill over there. That your mileage may vary, but it's sometimes useful to send around out that way. Okay. We'll talk about this area next, then we'll go back to the TDs down here. The reason that this area I find is conditional is you have to consider if there's artillery. If there's a lot of artillery, this for me is basically off limits. I won't go here. If you're slow, getting here can be worrisome if the enemy pushes to H5. Even if you're not slow and you just end up waiting here, there's a very large potential to be countered from K5. You could also get countered from J2, and we'll look at that in game in just a second. The benefit of being here is you can counter any of the tanks down here. You can potentially spot things up here, and just kind of be a little bit more safe than just side scraping back here or in this area, which will just get you killed. There is merit to it, and I'll show you when we get back into the game right here. So this right here is the ridge we're talking about. That's the conditional one. Whenever you're playing here, you're going to be using this and this to your advantage. But as you can see, if for some reason this area is compromised or this area is compromised, you will get wrecked by whatever's sitting here. And we will talk about this again once we go to the other side. This is a double bush in the sense of you have a tree here and the bush here. So what you can do is you can kind of do a little bit of a poke out. You got to be a little careful, but it's pretty concealed considering. Let's close this out real quick. You can see if you just do a poke through these bushes, not all the way through, but enough to where they're transparent, you can spot stuff down here as well. Any tanks tucking in this corner thinking they're safe. I've pulled 2,000 damage just on tanks that have pushed not even up to the conditional hill, but right here. It could be really detrimental. You have a little bit of a benefit being here because, again, you can farm anybody down in the valley. You could, if you're up here, potentially shoot up on kind of that JK line. You could also go up a little bit more and get potential shots over on that TD hill. Okay. As far as everything else, before this video goes on for too long, you have a TD spot back here, back here. These generally will give you line of sight. This will get you straight through mid. This will get you up to here, up to here. Just give you some nice shots generally. This one down south is a little bit more risky. You need to be able to move back. I wouldn't go here in anything particularly slow. Especially if there's artillery. Like, for example, you could take a Badger here, and the Badger would be fine right up until there's 3 artillery. Because 3 artillery, you cannot back out in time. If somebody's over in this corner here spotting you, you will get dunked on if that artillery decides your game is over. I find this hill to be a little bit more safe. It'll still give you shots to this area, even to this area, I think. But there's just... I feel like it's a little safer here. You could also dip down and you have access to a little more, like, firing lines, I guess. Anyway, again, we'll show what that looks like in game really quick. We'll cut all the way back this way. Go way, way, way down here. This is the ridge I was talking about. Again, you could see the usefulness of having a Badger. By being able to just hull down, you could really do potentially a lot of damage if the enemy pushes through that. You can also play back here we were mentioning. I tend to play over here. It gives you a little bit of a potential hull down if you're a small enough tank in this area. You also have shots down south, like I said. And if you end up getting wrecked, you could just slide off the hill and you'll take no damage. At least you shouldn't take any damage. You could also play over here if you want to, but this feels a little bit more exposed. To just a lot more. You need to be, if you're going to play here, you need to be very, very ready to fall down. Whereas over here, you can kind of do like a weird, like, hidey thing behind this. Anyway. Off we go. Back to strat sketch. That should cover generally, at least in random battles where I play in my heavies from spawn 1. Spawn 2, they should be very quick compared to spawn 1. There really is not a lot of variety here as far as where I'm playing. There are 2 spots, really. TDs, if for whatever reason it's a very passive looking battle, my team doesn't take north, which, again, even though I don't generally play north, my team, if they don't, there's a lot of potential farm here because a lot of players and randoms do push north. And from this hill, you can do a lot of damage, especially if you have tanks spotting over here, or you could even be one of those. I suppose we could mark that area off as well. Actually, hold on. Let's do this. Let's get rid of that. Do this. We'll showcase sort of this ridge. From all here, you can cover a pretty healthy chunk of north. This whole area becomes a firing line. It can be really detrimental to push. You also have access to F1. This is like one of my biggest complaints with World of Tanks. I find it is so amazingly frustrating how every map has to have these distinct, powerful, like, sniper positions. And I get the idea to have, like, power positions in the map, but my god is it annoying if you're trying to play a game, and especially with the amount of high alpha TDs in the game. Now at tier 8, you have the ISU 152K, the Scorpion G, the SU 130PM. One mistake and you lose like half your HP. Well, at that tier, or a third of your HP. It's really detrimental. And I'll show you just how strong that is when we get in game. I will also play at H5. We talked about that. We'll look at it again 1 second just to show another firing line I remembered. Otherwise, it's going to be very similar south in my... if you guys watched the medium guide for Sand River, it's very similar. I should have included this before. I'll play my TDs and heavies down here as well. If I'm playing like a 260, a Chieftain, a 277, fucking E5, for God's sake, I will play it down in this area. I just find it's too powerful to give up. Playing the JK line is so strong. It's going to be very similar to before. You start here, you look to target here or here, then you end up here, you counter all this shit in base, push through, kill artillery, and the game ends. It's the same thing from spawn 1. You start here, go here, go here, go here, and then push to F1 and the game's over. It's very similar, and I'll showcase that and the firing lines right now. So, if we go all the way to the other side, we'll show off from the north down. Let's cut all the way over there, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So as far as the TD ridge in base, same idea. You want to start here as close as possible to the enemy spawn. This way you can get shots on any tanks, specifically light tanks, that are cutting across if your team spots them. It's just free damage that there's no harm in trying to get. Otherwise, towards the end of the game, this rock here is okay. This rock here can be okay. But if you end up getting pushed, you got to be a little careful, because if somebody goes hull down, for example, over here on this little ridge, it can be pretty detrimental, and you will have a problem. Unless you just retreat quick, but if you sit here for an extended period of time, it can be annoying. Whereas over here, you kind of got a little bit more cover. You still got to be worried about artillery, and you still have to be worried about mid and like an EBR. If an EBR gets like over by those rocks, he can counter you from. Anyway, this is the ridge I'm talking about. I've seen people play over here. I wouldn't recommend it. It's a little too committed for me. As far as F1, we can go cover that now. You'll see up here, there's kind of a lot in a small area. You can sit here. I personally end up using this just as bait. If I'm going to snipe mid, I'll sit behind the rock here. Because even for me, a lot of players see Tank Destroyer, they see a bush, and they decide, I have to enter the bush. I need to become the bush, and they do. So there's a pretty good probability you'll get blind shot if you sit in this bush. If you're going to sit here, either sit further back, or sit behind the rock here and kind of poke your turret over. Or, if you're not using a turret, same idea. Just utilize the rock as much as possible. If the enemy team ends up pushing mid, you could sit over here and get some farm. You can sit, if you're tall enough, over here and get farm on tanks that are pushing down that like 1-2 line up that way. You can side scrape / hull down off of this rock here if you're tall enough. You could sit way back here and hull down if you are not worried about behind you down in the JK line. We'll talk about that in a second. there's so much potential. If you're losing the JK line, you can kind of like pseudo hold down here. If you're short enough, something like an STRV 103B would be good here. A Leopard 1, because you can kind of pull back a little bit. Stuff like that, where you could really just deal damage quickly and very heavily. But that should cover F1, I believe. Now we go down to the JK line, which if you pull up the map, you can kind of see all the areas we're talking about. F1, the A line. Down from here, I should have talked about this the first episode. When I'm sitting here, I don't think I conveyed it very well. If I'm going to cover mid, I'll do it from like right here. And you have shots on that ridge we were talking about in mid, right? Right there. That's that conditional hill. You could sit back here and farm that pretty heavily if somebody is playing that rather poorly. You can also hull down over in this area and shoot down south. The only problem with this is you'll get countered again from K3. This is a really, really powerful position. If your team has artillery, I know we all like to shit on artillery players, but there's no harm in saying, hey, could you guys shoot this stuff at K3 so we can push and get you more targets to light? If you just say, hey, shoot this, most players are going to disregard it, right? Or you could generally expect most players to. Whereas if you fire with, if you ask your artillery, like, yo, if you spot this, I'll spot, or if you shoot this, I'll give you more to shoot and get you more damage. Everybody wants damage. Artillery players, TD players, like everybody wants damage. So sometimes kind of like baiting them with that can be nice. Anyway, if you sit in this area, there's a lot of potential farm. And you'll get countered here by that. The counter to that spot, though, is taking something like a Chieftain or something with similar speed and hull down capability, a 5A even, and sit over here. You will get countered from mid. You can even sit right here. You will get countered from mid or artillery or TDs from that spot we mentioned over here. That's kind of that rock and base. It's just something to be aware of. But if it's pretty light as far as what's been spotted, or what's left, you can get a lot of damage here and force back a push. Because once you go from here, the target's going to be down to this. And from here, for example, if you can't kill the guy up at K3 on that corner, you can come down here, go hull down, and you're pretty much safe from anything behind you. Like, picture, you know, we're looking out of the turret of your tank right now. You can counter that, and there's basically nothing that can hit you from behind because you're still pretty short on this ridge. You'll look to push through south, so on and so forth. It's very similar to the first video. I encourage you to just kind of scrub through this video and get a general idea. Once I get to some other maps, this should be a lot more clear of a process. Oh, right. Let's look at H5, I think it is, one last time before I end this video out. If you sit down in here, there is a little angle here. It's pretty hard to see, but you could shoot through this into tanks down here, which sometimes it's not, believe me, this is not an angle you'll be hitting every game, but the occasional ability if someone's like hull down or side scraping off of this ridge, you can counter that through this little window. It's pretty rare. I've done it like a handful of times, but it's pretty nice. I find you can get some nice work out of it by just sending around through. You can also deal with somebody over there as well, occasionally. Otherwise, I think, let's go back to Straska. I think that should be everything as far as what I do in a heavy tank on Sand River, or in a TD. Hopefully you guys found this useful. Sorry it dragged on for a bit longer, we're almost 20 minutes. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, or preferably feedback as far as how I can make these better, please let me know. I find that bringing the in-game kind of model helps kind of showcase angles a little bit better. The map's a little bit less cluttered than the first one, but that should be it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and hopefully you guys enjoyed and you get some use out of this, and I will see you in the next guide, which is going to be a new map. There's not going to be any artillery guide for this. You don't need it. Believe me, you don't. Anyway, thanks for hanging out, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys next time.